Okay, now it's time to introduce our moderator for the afternoon. I was just so delighted when the students suggested the British design and architecture critic Justin McGuirk as a possible moderator for their conference. He's a really great critic and editor, and I'm sure we've all read his work in The Guardian, Icon, Design, Domus, and so forth, and followed his growing interest in Latin American architecture, and there's soon to be a book on this topic published by Verso. But I'm especially pleased to have him here today because of the way in which he's helping to shape what I think is a brighter future for design writing, with his directorship of the publishing arm of the Strelka Institute. Strelka Press publishes new essays and long-form journalism on architecture design in the city as really gorgeously designed ebooks. Based in Moscow and London and published in Russian and English, Strelka Press aims to be a crossroads for critical thinking from around the world. I think we all recognize that design publishing is in a state of chaotic flux, with new magazines and non-magazines emerging daily like bubbles out of the cauldron. With Strelka, I think what we have is a level-headed experience and critical clarity combined with that sort of bubbling enthusiasm. And this is exactly the kind of thing we need to lead us forward. And so now it's time for Justin to lead us forward into today's conference. And so here's the plan. We've invited 3 more wonderful speakers who will each give a talk at the head of their section. They will be followed by 2 or 3 decrit students, and then all of them will sit together over there with Justin for a chat. Got it? Good. Please welcome Justin McGuirk.
Thank you, Alice. Hello, everyone. It's very nice to be here, and very humbling to take the stage after Nicholson. That was a very beautiful talk, I must say, and really a testament to getting writers from all disciplines, and fiction writers especially, to think about design. And I have to congratulate Alice on what's been a really beautifully put together event. And there are some, and the students, well, I mean, we haven't seen the students yet, but there are some incredible people in the room, and I can't wait to hear from them. And it was very nice of you to invite me to be the moderator today. I hope I can keep the energy up because I'm a little bit jet-lagged. But being the moderator means I guess I'm going to be asking incredibly incisive questions and being terribly witty, and failing that, just telling you when there's a coffee break or something. But there's a space in the program for a few opening remarks. So I think what I'll do is just say a little bit about what I do, and then maybe raise a couple of issues that we can think about through the day when we talk about criticism. So, as Alice said, I've been an editor of a design magazine and a critic at a number of places, The Guardian and Domus and so on. And I must say I really enjoyed being the design critic of The Guardian for 3 years, because being a critic at a newspaper is an opportunity to really challenge the broader public's idea of what design is and what it's for. And I tried to do that by writing about all kinds of things that I felt a kind of mainstream audience would be surprised to find in a column about design. That, in the sense that design is not just about chairs and products, but it could be food, or it could be systems, or it could be public spaces. But generally the point was to prove that it was all around us, and that everything that we were sitting on and walking through was somehow imbued with some kind of meaning, and to try and tease out some of that meaning. And often I was quite critical in the way that Nicholson isn't, in the best possible sense. I think that talk was really about pleasure, and that's why it was such a lovely experience to listen to it. And I find a lot of pleasure in design too, but I also take quite a lot of pleasure in kind of critiquing it, because, I think commodity fetishism is really a fascinating thing. It does tell us a lot about ourselves, and I tried to get into that through talking about all manner of strange things like watches and adventure clothing and, kitchens, public spaces, and sometimes about systems too, the way things work. And I must say I took great pleasure in it, and still do for other people. But generally, I was just using design as a lens to look at the world. And I think, as Nicholson just proved, that it can be a tremendously rewarding thing to do. Now, I never studied architectural design. I'm an art historian by training. And so are some of my heroes, actually. You know, if I think about the critics that influenced me, like the British architecture and design critic Rayner Banham, he was an art historian, and I was trained in the same tradition, really, of connoisseurship. And in my day, there were no courses really teaching design or architecture criticism. You know, you had to come at it through, you know, the field of hard knocks or whatever it is. I don't know, the University of Hard Knocks, or just an interest from other fields. But the funny thing is, I mean, I abandoned art history quite early on into my career when I got interested in architecture, and I became, in a way, an extreme generalist. I mean, I write about everything from, as we've, products and technology to cities and urbanism at the broader end of the spectrum. And I must say that is a hugely pleasurable thing to do, to keep the spectrum broad. It's also really difficult and challenging to stay on top of things, to stay on top of the discourse at either ends of that spectrum and the technological change and the changing ideas. But it is fun to kind of try and keep a handle on it all. And with a view to that, I wrote a book recently about Latin American cities. It's called Radical Cities, and it comes out next month. And in a way, it was just an idea to make a book, something that I could get stuck into deep research, you know, because writing articles can be, it's fun, but it's sometimes just too fast. And so I went to Latin America and discovered that this place, this continent, this culture had a long history of radical ideas in city making. There was a real testing ground for extreme ideas. And I kind of created an adventure out of it. It was more of, in a way, a road trip. My publisher jokes that it's the motorcycle diaries of architecture. And I realized that, you know, modernism, Latin America was where modernism went to die, in a way, that the modernist utopia went to Latin America to die. That's where they took this Le Corbusian idea of the housing estate to its logical conclusion and built on a scale that we never managed, actually, in Europe or America, and we never intended to. And when that idea died, you know, other weird radical ideas popped up when governments gave up on the idea of actually building housing for the poor. That mass favelization of cities happened, enormous kind of segregation. And these things, I was arguing, are actually a more radical idea of city making than Brasilia ever was. And I tried to explore how, in the last decade, a new kind of architect has sprung up, in a way that this architect, the Latin American architects of the early 2000s, were, in a way, the social conscience of their profession at a time when everyone else was building museums in China and just generally, you know, fulfilling each other's wildest fantasies. And where am I going with that? Nothing really. I'm just saying that it was an adventure. You know, it was research. It was fun. It was deeply engrossing. But I'm also a publisher, and a couple of years ago I launched this project that you described called Strelka Press. Strelka is a research institute in Moscow. A very interesting place in many ways because it's very hard to define. It's also kind of a kind of cool bar and restaurant and club space and event space, and really setting the agenda in Moscow in a place that they consider to be a kind of backward void, strangely. And we thought, well, how would you do publishing and criticism in the 21st century? You know, are we going to produce beautiful books and struggle to get them distributed to a few bookshops around the world? Or shall we experiment with the kind of brave new world of digital publishing? And of course, we did the latter. And we also thought, how do you respond to this new universe of social media and Twitter and the economy of Facebook likes? And you know, as the editor of the London Review of Books, Mary Kay Wilmers, put it, there's an awful lot of short opinion around. And we thought, well, let's indulge in long-form writing. Let's try and revive long-form writing. And so we tried to revive the essay, except we did it for a digital age, kind of following the iTunes model. And instead of kind of producing albums like books, we produce songs, these essays, which are individually available to read on a phone or an iPad or something. We still have some love for print culture, so we produce little kind of print artifacts. This was the first series of books, just postcards really. And And this is going very well, slowly but very well. We've got some interesting books in the second series too, and some very good ones coming up. But to talk about criticism more generally, I would say that we've reached peak oil, and we've also reached peak criticism anxiety. There's never been more hand-wringing about the state of criticism, I've noticed. But at the same time, there's never been more criticism around, never more courses teaching criticism, never more critical conferences, never more invocations to critical thinking. So all of which leads me to believe that the beast is not dead yet. And in fact, I think there's never been more criticism around than there is today. I think we're producing more than ever. So when people talk about a crisis, I wonder what they mean. I think it's a crisis of authority and audience. And in a sense, because what we notice in this debate is that we see we see magazines that we used to love closing down, and we see critics at newspapers being kind of fired and so on. And so we focus on the negative. Actually, I think there's been a tremendous groundswell of critical writing that is unsurpassed in previous periods. People talk about a golden age of criticism because they're thinking of one person like Rainer Bannermore, Ada Louise Huxtable or someone like this. But actually, the amount of criticism around today is really phenomenal. And with all of this social media that everyone's so terrified by, the digital culture that's supposed to be killing off criticism, I would say that actually it's never been easier to find an audience, which is a wonderful thing for the students here today to know. At the same time, it's never been harder to guarantee the size of that audience. In the sense that if we're not writing for the mainstream press, then the targets of our ire, or the people that we want to reach, the mayor downwards, might not be reading our words over their cornflakes. So I think the challenge of criticism is to find an audience today. And I've been reading a lot of Hannah Arendt recently, and in this incredibly dense and rich book, The Human Condition, there are so many things to quote, but one thing that struck me, she said, "No activity can become excellent if the world does not provide a proper space for its exercise." And I think criticism is somewhat like that, but we can't expect, the world does not owe us a job. Do you know what I mean? The press does not owe us space to write about design. We have to create it. We have to kind of argue for it. We have to be persuasive. We have to find our voice, but we have to find our voice once we graduate from these courses and so on. We have to find our voice out in the world, out in the kind of hot forge of whatever media it is that we're using. And I think it's actually, despite all this kind of anxiety about criticism, it's a tremendously rich and positive time to be doing that. So, I won't say much more than that, really. I'm going to try and come up with some good questions throughout the day.